Finding the worst Pokemon in every generation was surprisingly difficult, but I believe I've done it. Here is my criteria. For each generation, I will choose a Pokemon that debuted in that generation, and I will be talking about them in the context of the game they were released in. I will only be talking about fully evolved or single-stage Pokemon, because I think that's more interesting. Obviously, Caterpie is a bad Pokemon, but it doesn't feel very fair to judge Caterpie so harshly. It hasn't gotten a chance to prove itself yet, so only fully evolved Pokemon or Pokemon that cannot evolve. Let's get right into it with Gen 1, and surprisingly, there were a few contenders here to consider for worst Pokemon. And the first one that came to mind for me was Parasect. Parasect is a bug grass type fully evolved Pokemon with some absolutely dreadful disadvantages. This typing is atrocious, with 2 glaring ×4 weaknesses to fire and flying. It is extraordinarily slow and frail. It would seem to have no real benefit, perhaps aside from its flavorful mushroom-inspired appearance. Amazingly though, I think that there are worse Pokemon in Gen 1. Parasect's typing in Gen 1 is actually not that terrible. Being weak to flying and fire in later gens is a serious death sentence, but in Gen 1, there aren't that many fire-type attacks running around. Coverage is generally less common, so Parasect actually ends up benefiting from traits like its ground resistance. Ice weakness is more of a concern. Ice is very common, but that fire and flying ×4 weakness is not as much of a detriment in Gen 1 as it becomes later. Also, at least Parasect has a pretty cool move pool. It's the only Pokemon in Gen 1 that gets Spore, which is the 100% accurate sleep move. It has Body Slam and Hyper Beam, which are great attacks. It has Swords Dance, which is a rare option in Gen 1. And it has Stun Spore, which can paralyze ground types. Despite its inaccuracy, it's a solid option. We can do worse than Parasect. What about Beedrill? A fully evolved, very cool looking bee-themed Pokemon that has disappointed multiple different generations of children. Beedrill is an atrocious bug poison type. And in Gen 1, being Psychic weak is absolutely horrendous. Beedrill is not horrendously slow with 75 speed, but it's also pretty unimpressive. It's very frail. It has no good stamp moves in this generation, and the signature move Twin Needle is pretty unimpressive. But hey, at least Beedrill has the Agility Swords Dance combo and Hyper Beam. Maybe it can do something. And to be honest, Bug Poison in this generation is a better typing than just Mono Poison, because at least you are neutral to ground. Not everyone can have such a privilege Beedrill. If you thought it couldn't be any worse than this, you were wrong. Arbok might not come to mind as one of the worst Gen 1 Pokemon, but it absolutely is a terrible Pokemon in this debut game. I'm very glad that they gave Arbok more notable traits later, because in Gen 1 it is really suffering. Poison is the worst type you can have in this game. There are no notable poison attacks to take advantage of, and it is nothing but downside. Toxic immunity is useless. No one runs Toxic, and you are weak to 2 of the most common attacking types in the game, Psychic and Ground. I literally think that Bug Poison and Bug Grass are better typings to have in Gen 1 than just Mono Poison. That's how bad this typing is. And of all the Mono Poison types, Arbok is perhaps the worst. At least, Weezing and Muk have Explosion, which lets them trade with enemies. Arbok does not even have that privilege. I suppose a snake is not a very explosive animal, but still. So the typing is terrible, the stats are also terrible. 60 HP, goodness gracious. But I suppose at least Arbok gets Glare, which can paralyze ground types. That might be useful. It has Wrap, which in Gen 1 is a very good move that can prevent the target from acting at all. I don't even think that in Gen 1 ZU people use this. It seems bad. But I suppose these are traits. But there is a Pokemon that has almost no traits of its own that I think is by far the worst in Gen 1. And that is the very unfortunate Ditto. Ditto is perhaps the original gimmick Pokemon. It is an indistinct blob with a face that screams existential dread. Ditto is a single-stage Pokemon that cannot evolve, and it can only learn a single move, the move Transform. When used, it will copy the enemy Pokemon, becoming a transformative version of them, copying along with it their stat stage changes and other such traits. A very interesting move, but unfortunately Ditto is terrible at making use of it. Ditto has an atrocious base stat of 48 in every single one of its stats. If Ditto can manage to survive a hit, which is unlikely, it will transform into the enemy and be on death's door anyway. For a very long time, Ditto remained among the worst Pokemon in the series. That was until Gen 5 when they gave it the ability Imposter, which allows it to transform immediately upon switching into the field. It was a great change that gave Ditto more to do and gave it some actual competitive value. But Ditto having to spend a turn transforming is just extremely terrible, and unfortunately Ditto is quite significantly the worst Pokemon in Gen 1, I would say. Now we move on to Generation 2, and the first Pokemon that probably comes to mind for many people when we're talking about bad Gen 2 Pokemon, famously bad ones, would be Ledian. Ledian is a bug-flying type, famous for having very bizarre stats. It has various punching-themed moves, as well as boxing gloves in its appearance, and yet its attack stat is a measly 35. Ledian is notable for having an incredible 110 special defense stat, which is actually very good, and some theorize that when developing the game they accidentally swapped these stats. It would make more sense for Ledian to have a 110 attack stat, but something got mixed up. But in the final product it ended up having a special defense stat as its highest, and this wasn't exactly a great fit on Ledian, with its largely offensive move pool, limited healing or utility options. It's not exactly a fantastic special wall, so Ledian ends up in a bizarre position, with an identity that even the developers were unclear on. However, Ledian is actually far from the bottom of the barrel of Gen 2, to be honest. Ledian finds itself ranked in the NU tier, which is, yes, pretty bad, but it does get much worse. Ledian is outranking quite a few Pokemon, and that is because thanks to its special bulk and access to agility and baton pass, it has some relevance as a speed passer. It can assist allies by giving them a high speed stat. Ledian also happens to carry Light Screen and Reflect, which are useful for supporting your incoming speed receiver. For this reason, Ledian is actually somewhat okay at a very specific role in the Gen 2 metagame. Now later on it would have little to do as Baton Pass was banned, but in Gen 2 Baton Pass is not banned. And Ledian has a purpose, even if that purpose is rather limited. There is worse than Ledian. Macago is another famously bad Gen 2 debut that you might have thought of. Macago, of course, one of the most powerful Pokemon in the series politically, but in combat not so much. Macago's Fire-Rock typing is one of the worst you can get in the game, with two glaring weaknesses to water and ground. That's 2 times 4 super effective weaknesses that are extremely common types even in Gen 2. And there are even more weaknesses than that to contend with for Macago, unfortunately. Macago is extraordinarily slow with only 30 speed, and while it does have impressively high defense, its low base HP of only 50, and all of those terrible type weaknesses give it a serious uphill battle finding anything to do. Its damage output is also limited. Its 80 special attack is underwhelming, and 50 attack is, frankly, embarrassing. Some say that Macago is hotter than the surface of the sun, which seems like it would have some combat benefit, but no, Macago is struggling in combat. Being hotter than the sun doesn't save you when it comes to battle tactics, does it? In Gen 2, Macago finds itself in the PU tier, which is very low, but it's not the lowest tier. There's a tier below, because Macago does have access to Curse, meaning it can be a little bit of a win condition. And it does have very good defense. That defense stat comes in handy, especially when you are up against other low-tier Pokemon. An impressive defense stat like this actually does make up for your shortcomings on the typing side. So no, Macago is not the worst. What about Ariados, a rather freaky-looking spider creature? This is a bug poison type, which you may be reminded of Beedrill. Well, guess what? Ariados is even worse. You thought Beedrill was banned? What if Beedrill but slower? That's what Ariados is, with a measly 40 base speed, and scarcely any benefits on the other stats to make up for that. Now in the past, Ariados could do a little bit of spider trickery that was valuable, with its move Spider Web, which traps the enemy much like the move Mean Look. Exactly the same effect, but spider themed. And Ariados also carries Baton Pass. If you trap something and then Baton Pass out, they actually remain trapped even up against the new Pokemon. And this had some game-breaking possibilities. You could trap a Snorlax, Baton Pass to something with Sand Attack, and then lower their accuracy to the point where they can't hit you anymore. It was one of those scenarios where you could just win on turn 1 by completely restricting your opponent from doing anything to stop you. And this worked not only against Snorlax, but various Pokemon. This strategy was since banned though. You cannot use trapping moves in conjunction with Baton Pass. So Ariados now has very little value. It can still Agility Pass, but there are better Pokemon at doing that. Ariados is definitely pretty damn close to the bottom. There's little going for it, but there is one clear worst Pokemon in Gen 2, I think, and that would have to be Unknown. Unknown is actually pretty similar to Ditto when you think about it. It's a Pokemon that largely exists for flavor purposes and for a funny joke, really, that has terrible stats and can only learn one attack. The attack Unknown is able to learn is Hidden Power. Hidden Power is an attack introduced in Gen 2 that changes its base power and type based on your Pokemon's IVs. A very useful attack on many Pokemon, but if it's the only attack you have, this is of course dreadful. Unknown is not just the worst Pokemon in Gen 2, it's the worst Pokemon ever created. It is extraordinarily limited with zero advantages whatsoever. It's certainly one of the most intriguing Pokemon though. There is much lore surrounding it, and there is a film in which Unknown, when working together, can have supernatural powers and such. I think that's fun. That captures the imagination. It would be cool to see them return to Unknown in a future game and give it a powerful form evocative of that sort of wonder that they give it in the animated series and in films. In the game, unfortunately, Unknown is unimpressive and nothing more than a little bit of set decoration. The greatest utility it has is that it can be used to spell out words, because each Unknown consists of a random letter. They are shaped like letters. That has some utility, and Unknown H famously can be used to play Mario Kart Wii, which is a very useful out-of-battle effect. But in battle, Unknown is rather underwhelming, obviously. Moving on to Gen 3, there's a Pokemon I'm sure you're all thinking of. Delibird is famous for being bad. That is its most noteworthy trait. Delibird is a little penguin themed around Santa Claus that has so many detriments and few advantages. Delibird is an ice-flying type, which right off the rip is atrocious. Atrocious. It times 4 weak to rock. Ice carries with it so many glaring weaknesses. It's just a terrible typing. If Articuno can't exist as an ice-flying type, Delibird can scarcely hope to. Beyond that, look at your stats. You expect me to make use of a 45 base HP? There are no good stats here. Your best stat is a 75 speed. You have no offensive power, no defensive value, and you're not even that fast, for goodness sake. Delibird is truly, truly struggling in all areas. For any semblance of damage output, it relies on the ability Hustle, which grants a 1.5x attack stat, with the detriment of making all of your moves a bit inaccurate. Now this is incredible synergy with Aerial Ace, which cannot miss, bypassing the Hustle effect, but that just sort of gives you a baseline okay attack, because of course Aerial Ace starts out with a measly 60 power, so you can be thankful that Aerial Ace isn't missing, but at the end of the day you're still not doing much damage. Delibird is a rare Pokemon that is able to miss Rapid Spin, which is truly a dreadful thought, isn't it? I don't think Delibird is the worst Pokemon in Gen 3 though, amazingly. At least it has Rapid Spin. That's an actual good trait. You don't have to run Hustle, you can run Vital Spirit so that Rapid Spin is accurate. So being a spinner has value. At least you have Ice Stab, that's okay. You have Vital Spirit as another option, which gives you sleep immunity, and yes, that's about it, but this is more than some other Pokemon can say that they have, to be honest. You might think I'm crazy. Also, at least Delibird is immune to spikes, so that's good. There is worse than Delibird. Let's explore that idea. Now, what about Spinda? You may have also been thinking of this one. Spinda was designed, yet again, as a comedic joke. They sometimes do this. They make a Pokemon not to function in battle, but to be a work of comedy, which is artistic in its own right. But Spinder in battle is dreadful. All of its stats are 60, which is very low. It has the useless ability Own Tempo, granting confusion immunity. That's not going to save you, Spinder, I'm sorry. It's an unexciting normal type, and it has the laughable signature ability Dizzy Punch with a 70 power on it, which you don't even really use. Spinder is dreadful, it's not even used in the ZU tier. At least Delibird is sometimes used in one competitive tier. It's the lowest competitive tier, but you do see Delibird as a mixed attacker with spin on it. That is somewhat valuable. I'm not sure Spinder provides anything, but I don't think Spinder is the worst Pokemon in the game for one reason here. One reason, and that is that it has access to Trick. And that is a good move that switches your item with the enemy. So you can run Choice Man Trick Spinder, and this has a chance to achieve something in certain situations. Because if you trick a Choice Band onto a defensive Pokemon, they become incapacitated. They become useless in many cases. Simply because Spinder has this option, I think it is better than the following Pokemon, who is the worst Pokemon in Gen 3. And that is Beautifly. I actually think Beautifly is worse than Delibird and Spinder, if that's even possible. Beautifly is one of the worst Pokemon ever created. It is a bug flying type, which at this point is a crowded type combo. It's competing with other bug flying types even within the lowest competitive tier of ZU. Butterfree is destroying you with its compound eyes for accurate sleep and paralysis, as well as a better move pool overall. Masquerain is destroying you with access to Intimidate. Beautifly, on the other hand, has the ability Swarm. Dreadful on a Pokemon with such a terrible attack stat. Who the hell is using Beautifly for damage output? Swarm is an offensive ability granting bonus bug damage at 1/3 HP or less. It simply doesn't come up that this guy ever uses this ability. It's not very good. Beautifly's best move that it has is probably Stun Spore to inflict paralysis. That has an impact, but within ZU there are so many better paralysis users. So many better bug flying types. So many better other general bug types, and Beautifly is outclassed by every Pokemon I can imagine. It has very little in the way of unique traits whatsoever. It does nothing, it excels in no areas, and it's just a failed Pokemon all around, unfortunately. We can't deny that it's beautiful. I mean, it's right there in the name, especially this proboscis that it has that spirals around downwards, representing the downward spiral of this Pokemon's existence. Artistically, a fantastic Pokemon. Functionally in battles, one of the worst Pokemon ever created. Now we move on to Gen 4, and I gotta be honest, I always forget that Chatot is a Gen 4 Pokemon. In my mind, this is a Gen 5 Pokemon, but no. Debuted in Gen 4, where you may think, oh, this guy's not too bad, it's got Chatter, right? Chatter's really broken. Well, in Gen 4, Chatter was terrible. Chatter was a 60 power flying type attack with only a 31% confusion chance. It would later be buffed to a 100%, but in its debut, this is a pretty damn terrible Pokemon. A single stage normal flying type, which is a crowded type combo with so many better competitors. Staraptor is of course far better, but even Swellow and Pidgeot are destroying Chatot in the free market. But apparently, according to the Smogon analysis page, and I don't know if this is true, but according to the Smogon analysis page, Chatot has a niche in the Gen 4 UU tier because of its 91 base speed, which is just higher than the very common 90 base speed benchmark in that tier. And with its okay 92 special attack and access to Nasty Plot, as well as Encore for disruption, this can actually be a niche setup sweeper. It has Stab Hyper Voice and Heat Wave for coverage. Now, I would like to see that to believe it, but if someone took the time to write all that, then I trust that they know what they're talking about and that this is at least somewhat true. Okay, I doubt that any good players are using this very much, but honestly, it doesn't sound too bad. It's a good speed benchmark. Encore is always great utility, and yeah, I could see the offensive move pool actually being decent here. So I suppose Chatot is not the worst Gen 4 Pokemon. Is there worse? How about Vespiquen? Vespiquen is an interesting one, because it's a great visual design. a queen bee themed Pokemon that looks as if it's ready for battle and has some interesting exclusive moves. It has the attack order move. As it is the queen bee, it is able to order other bees to do combat on its behalf. And it has the defend order move, which is very similar. Thematically a very cool Pokemon, ordering bees around to do your bidding, but functionally, this is not that different to other bug types that already exist. It's yet another bug flying type, and that attack order move is just a 90 power bug type attack with a high crit rate. It's maybe a bit above average for a bug type attack in Gen 4, but nothing crazy, especially because your attack stat is only 80, which is pretty unexciting. Your stats overall are okay, more well balanced than most bugs, with 102 defense and special defense and an okay 70 speed, but at the same time, they're nothing spectacular. 40 speed is very low, and remember, this is the gen that introduced Stealth Rock. So being a bug flying type with a more defensively oriented design like this is kind of a crap in the world where, you know, you maybe have the worst defensive typing that exists. So maybe ice flying is a bit worse, but bug flying is pretty damn bad itself. And your ability is pressure. Making the enemy lose more PP is a decent defensive ability with some potential stalling application, but I don't know if you're going to be getting much out of that with such bad defensive qualities. I think Vespiquen is an interesting idea, but one that didn't quite land, and that is pretty damn dreadful even for the Gen 4 ZU tier. There's not much use for Vespiquen. But at least Vespiquen is somewhat worth a damn, which I cannot say about Wormadam. I think that the worst Pokemon in Gen 4 is Wormadam in its base form. Wormadam is a Pokemon with multiple different forms, different typings. It can be Bug Ground and Bug Steel, but the worst of the typings it can have is its base form, which is Bug Grass. As we went over earlier with Parasect, this typing is absolutely atrocious, with 2 glaring types for weaknesses to Flying and Fire, and what do you know, now those are actually a problem. Back in Gen 1 you could sort of get away with it, but now Flying type attacks and Fire type attacks are going to be everywhere. You're also Ice weak, and dreadfully you are Rock weak, which is worse than ever now that Stealth Rock exists. Do you have any traits to make up for this terrible typing? Not really. At least Parasect has Spore, one of the best moves in the game. Wormadam doesn't have Spore. Wormadam has, I don't know, Signal Beam? Signal Beam? You don't even get Stealth Rock, I thought you might. Thought I might give you credit for having Stealth Rock, Wormadam, but in no regard are you worth a damn. In no regard. It's difficult to imagine what Wormadam does whatsoever. It has the ability Anticipation, which on switch-in, you will shudder if any foe has a super effective attack, so I imagine you're going to be shuddering a lot. The best, most noteworthy trait about Wormadam is that it cowers in fear at the very common sight of a super effective attack. For goodness sake. That is Wormadam's defining trait. I'm very sorry to say, but Wormadam, I think, has very, very little value. I think even Beautifly at least has, like, Stun Spore and stuff. This guy's slow, worst typing ever, no moves. What can be said, man? This is a dreadful one. Definitely the worst Pokemon in Gen 4 is Wormadam base. Now we move on to Gen 5. And in Gen 5, I think that one of the most boring Pokemon ever created debuted. That was Unpheasant. Unpheasant is the Route 1 bird of this game, and it has absolutely no distinct traits over any other Route 1 birds. It's a very disappointing Pokemon. Unpheasant is a normal flying type, middle-of-the-road stats, and an unimpressive 93 speed, and its ability is Super Luck for an increased crit rate. Bit of a snooze, little bit underwhelming. There's Big Pecs, which is big nothing, and Rivalry for extra damage against opposite gender targets. Unpheasant is terrible. Normal flying just gets worse and worse as a type combo as the franchise goes on, so you really need distinct traits to function as a normal flying type. Staraptor and Swellow are examples of that, with their powerful abilities. But it's hard to see Unpheasant as anything more than a Pidgeot clone that does absolutely nothing of note, except maybe Hypnosis to put an enemy to sleep very unreliably with 60% accuracy. Even in the Gen 5 ZU tier, Unpheasant is scarcely seen. Now, you guys know me, I'm the kind of guy to crack jokes here and there about funny Pokemon. racking my brain of what kind of joke I can pull for Unpheasant, and there's nothing. There's nothing coming to mind. Nothing springs to mind, Unpheasant. You're just a bird. There's many birds. What do you offer, Unpheasant? What comedy can be drawn from Unpheasant? I implore you folks to come up with some sort of Unpheasant-themed joke in the comments, because I am struggling to think of anything. But amazingly, I don't think Unpheasant is the worst. I think there's worse. There is Ledian. Now, Ledian, you may be surprised to hear me say that, because doesn't this get sticky web? Isn't that at least a little useful? No, this is Gen 5, and sticky web doesn't exist yet. In Gen 5, when Ledian debuts, it is a bug grass type Pokemon, which we know has a history of being terrible. We know this, and Ledian is no different. This typing is a lot to overcome, and Ledian just doesn't do much that overcomes it. I will say Ledian is a bit more impressive than Wormadam. That's not a very high bar, but it is, because it has a 103 attack stat and 92 speed, which is statistics you can sort of work with. It's got X-Scissor for Bug Stab, Leaf Blade for Grass Stab, and it has the utility option of Heal Bell for what that's worth. Now, economically, Ledian is very different to evaluate, because this guy can produce Silk, which I think has monetary value. But economics, while it's a battlefield on its own, believe me, it doesn't quite translate to combat strength, so we cannot give Ledian bonus points for that. Amazingly though, there's a worse Pokemon than this. The infamous ice cream themed Pokemon of Vanillux. I think Vanillux is the worst Pokemon in Gen 5. Despite its flaws, especially over time, I think Bug Grass is still a better typing than Mono Ice, because Mono Ice is truly a death sentence. An Ice-type Pokemon has no resistances beside the ice itself, myriad weaknesses, and just such a significant uphill battle. To function as a Mono Ice type, you need to move mountains. You need to do more than what regular Pokemon are expected of. It's a huge debuff, and Vanillux simply doesn't do any of that. It's a Mono Ice type with very little to offer over any other Ice type that I can imagine. The best trait Vanillux has going for it is a high special attack stat of 110, which is okay, but all of its other stats are very bad. Ledian at least has like ground resistance and certain things it can switch in against. I don't think Vanillux can switch in on anything except ice type attacks. This guy has the ability Ice Body, which is a sick joke really, granting extra chip heal in the hail. Come on. Chip heal on this Pokemon? As if it's surviving more than 2 seconds. And then there's Weak Armor, which, if hit by a physical attack, defense is lowered by 1, speed is raised by 1. How is this living a physical attack? Let's be honest. Let's be completely honest. The best thing to do with Vanillux is to give it a choice scarf and hope that Stab Ice Beam carries you home. You do have a good special attack stat, I suppose, and Stab Ice Beam's always nice, but it's got a pretty limited move pool. It's relying on Hidden Power Ground for coverages, Flash Cannon, which in Gen 5 isn't great coverage. It's really starving, ironically, considering it is a food-based Pokemon. It is starving for any good attacks. It's not quite fast enough to make up for from the inherent debuff of being ice. I do think Vanillux is the worst of the worst in Gen 5. This is my belief. Now we move on to Gen 6, where a funny new Pokemon was released, Go-Goat. A goat that never stops moving forward. This is a Pokemon with determination. And there is an irony to this, the fact that a Pokemon called Goat is actually one of the worst of all time. That doesn't sound right, but it's the truth. Go-Goat is one of the worst new Pokemon introduced in Gen 6. This is a weird guy. He's a slow, mono-grass type with some positive qualities. 123 HP is very good, but you have dreadful defenses, an average attack of 100, and kind of a boring move pool with extremely limited options. You have the ability Grass Pelt, which grants extra defense in grassy terrain. Might sound okay, but then you remember, oh yeah, the Tapus come out next gen, there's no grassy terrain setters. Rillaboom is far in the future. You've got to manually set grassy terrain with the move Grassy Terrain. That's hardly worth it for a simple defense boost. Sap Sipper is okay for grass immunity and some attack boosts sometimes, but not much of a help. You already resist grass anyway. This Pokemon, I'm learning some funny things today. Did you know that Go-Goat in Gen 6 ZU is outclassed by various other grass types, including Servine, the middle stage of the superior line, Servine is destroying Gogoat. So is Simisage, the monkey that everybody forgets about. Simisage is way better than Gogoat in Gen 6. ZU. But Gogoat is not completely unviable in this tier. It's fairly good, separating itself from these other grass types by being a more physically oriented one. And maybe that Sap Sipper actually comes in handy when Simisage is a meta threat you gotta be wary of. So despite being pretty bad, Gogoat is not the worst. How about Meowstick? This is a pretty bad one. Meowstick is a new cat Pokemon introduced in Gen 6. A mono-psychic type, which is a typing that at this point in the series has become pretty bad, with its Ghost, Dark, and Bug weakness being overall more of a detriment than a positive. Psychic typing itself also bad offensively. Meowstick has very bad stats, a pretty limited move pool, and overall very lackluster traits. But Meowstick does have one saving grace, despite all this averageness, with a bad typing, bad stats, and unexciting move pool. It has the ability Prankster, which grants priority to non-damaging moves. And this is a great ability, one of the best utility passive abilities you can have in the whole game. So with Prankster, you at least have some of your utility moves with priority on them. You've got Dual Screens, Reflect on Light Screen, and Thunder Wave. That's probably the best you can get with this, but at least you have this saving grace when everything else about you is so bad. But there's one Pokemon that cannot say the same, and unfortunately, it's the very same Pokemon female version. What? The female version of Meowstick I actually incorrectly thought was exactly the same. And I apologize. In my recent ranking every cat video, I didn't realize there was a difference, but there is. These guys are exactly the same, except for the fact that Meowstick female doesn't get Prankster. Instead, it gets Competitive, which is an ability that grants a special attack boost if your stats are lowered. And I'm sorry, but Competitive is a far worse ability than Prankster. At least Prankster gives you something to do. But Meowstick female has the same stats, the same debilitating typing, and an ability that doesn't even make sense on the Pokemon. You're not a particularly great special attacker. 83 special attack is no good. So unfortunately, the female version of this cat is objectively inferior. No, I didn't make the game. I assumed they were equals. That was my initial assumption, but the developers had different things in mind, okay? Meowstick female is regrettably the worst Pokemon from the Generation 6 video games. In Generation 7, the controversial Gumshoos was first introduced, and Gumshoos is a really weird Pokemon. This is a new early game normal type with some extremely unfortunate stats. It is slow, only base 45 speed, and its HP and defenses are also low. Gumshoos is paling in comparison to some of its competitors like Raticate and Linoon. Gumshoos is certainly one of the worst Pokemon in Gen 7, but there is a bit of a saving grace for this guy, and that is the ability Stakeout, which is a really good offensive ability. Stakeout means you have a doubled offensive stat if the target is switching out on the current turn. So if Gumshoos manages to find itself forcing a switch, it will deal double damage to the incoming switch, which is actually really good. It even basically makes up for resisted attacks, making your normal type return much more spammable. Gumshoos also has a pretty respectable physical move pool. Options like Earthquake and U-Turn, as well as Crunch for some way to hit ghosts. Now Gumshoos still does have very debilitating 45 speed. It's not like Stakeout is making up for all of this Pokemon's shortcomings that it's built with. It is ranked in ZU in Gen 7, but there are worse Pokemon than this. Shiinotic is an interesting one. This is a bad Pokemon that I quite like. On the visual design and concept side, it's an interesting mushroom creature with a grass fairy typing and some fun traits. Shiinotic has a grass fairy type combination, which brings with it an unfortunate times 4 weakness to poison. You are weak to a lot of types, in fact, with Shiinotic, and it's another one of those Pokemon with the unfortunate combination of glaring weaknesses on the typing side and low speed. There are echoes of Parasect here, as you have a 30 base speed on this Pokemon, and fairly average bulk. You do have 100 special defense, but low HP and middling defense. Much like Parasect though, Shiinotic has access to the move Spore. Makes sense, it's a mushroom creature. Shiinotic also has access to Strength Sap, one of the best moves in the game. Strength Sap will lower your target's attack by 1 stage and then heal you for an amount based on how high the enemy's attack is. And often Strength Sap does far more healing than regular healing moves because of this. Especially against high attack opponents, you will not only weaken them a little bit, you will fully heal your Pokemon, which is very good. So Shiinotic has these advantages, 2 of the greatest utility moves in the game, and a typing that is in some ways dreadful, but in other ways solid. Fairy is always nice, you're immune to Dragon. You've got nice resistances to fighting in Dark. Fairy cancels out your bug weakness, and Grass has its benefits too, with powder immunity and other such resistances. Now don't get me wrong, Shiinotic is still very bad, it's ZU, and it's ranked fairly low on the ZU power rankings, but at least it's unique, and at least it does stuff that nothing else does. I would give Shiinotic some real credit for that. I think the worst Pokemon in Gen 7 is actually Oricorio in its base form. Now I recently made a video about Oricorio and all its different forms, because Oricorio is the most banned Pokemon in history, in Gen 9 at least. All of its different forms have been wreaking havoc in various ways in lower tiers of competitive singles. But this is because in Gen 9, Oricorio received the huge buff of Quiver Dance, one of the best moves in the game. And Revelation Dance has newfound utility alongside the terrestrialization mechanic, since it can change based on your current type. It's like a better version of Terra Blast. These 2 changes made Oricorio way better in Gen 9. But back when this Pokemon came out in Gen 7, it didn't have either of these valuable traits. In Gen 7, heavy-duty boots didn't exist either, so the base form of Oricorio having a fire-flying typing was a huge uphill battle for it, with that dreadful times for rock weakness. Oricorio, of course, has very bad stats, with 70s as far as the eye can see. A 98 special attack is okay, but truly nothing special. The ability Dancer is largely useless. If another Pokemon uses a dancing-themed move, you will copy it and use it as well. Rarely ever comes up. So Oricorio is just weak. It requires hard status removal to even exist in the first place, which is just not worth it when there's not much reward for even running this Pokemon in the first place. It has some okay options like Revelation Dance, which is a decent stab move, Stab Hurricane, and U-Turn, but these are not enough to justify all of your shortcomings. I think Oricorio's base form is the worst Pokemon in Gen 7, at least when it first came out. It would become much better later, but at release this was a pretty bad one. Now we move on to Gen 8, which might have the most contenders for worst Pokemon in a generation. There are some stinkers here, unfortunately. And I'd like to kick things off with one of the worst of them all, Mr. Rime. A new evolution for Galarian Mr. Mime. A new Pokemon in Gen 8. The long-awaited evolution for the Mr. Mime line is a huge disappointment, with its first flaw being very noticeable, that Ice Psychic typing. This is among the worst type combinations you can get, especially by the Gen 8 games. We all know how many weaknesses Ice carries with it, and Psychic is no better. Psychic carries with it Ghost, Dark, and Bug weaknesses, which are increasingly common offensive types as the franchise goes on. It's a truly, truly horrendous type combination, and Mr. Rime scarcely makes up for it with anything else it has going on. Its stats are average. It has an okay special defense, a solid special attack, but it's slow. It's rather frail overall. This Pokemon is just going to struggle to exist in all avenues. It struggles to hit the field, pose much of a threat. It's just not quite fast enough, and the result is just a dreadful Pokemon. But I do think there are worse Pokemon than this, and I'll explain why. Mr. Rime at least has Freeze Dry, which is a great attack, an Ice-type move that hits water super effectively. Rapid Spin is good utility. Boots now exist, at least allowing you to switch it on rocks more safely, which is good. So Ice types aren't completely dead in the water just for being Ice type anymore. They still suck overall, but at least you got Boots now. So those traits are okay, and they give Mr. Rime some semblance of value in ZU at least. What about Falinks? Falinks is a new fighting type Pokemon from Gen 8. A weird conglomerate of little spheres coming together to be greater than the sum of their parts, and yet still very bad. What a terrible, terrible tragedy. Falinks is just no good. It's a fighting type with so much competition. Falinks has 100 attack, which is okay, but nothing special. 65 HP is terrible, and its speed is in that awkward area where it's kind of fast, but not fast enough to actually pose a good offensive threat. Even in ZU, Falinks is outclassed by other fighting types like Primate, and that is rough. Even in the world of ZU, you are not that great. Falinks has the signature move No Retreat, which has an interesting effect. It grants +1 to all of your stats, but then prevents you from being able to switch out. It's an all-or-nothing play. And you also can't click this more than once. You can only get +1 to all stats. You can't keep clicking it and racking up boosts. It's a pretty good move, but I don't think it's enough to really justify all of Falinks' flaws. This is a really bad one, but at least Falinks has some noteworthy traits. It has Defiant, which is a good ability, granting +2 attack if you get stats lowered. It's a bit of insurance against Intimidate, anti-webs technology, anti-defog technology. Falinks also gets the move First Impression, which is a very good move. A 90 power bug type attack with priority on it that only works the first turn you're in, but it's a great revenge KO option that gives Falinks not only bug coverage, but a high power revenge KO priority move, which I don't think other fighting types in ZU get. Congratulations, Falinks, you are not the worst. There are worse Pokemon. Now, whose bright idea was it to introduce an orb-based beetle to the Pokemon economy? What were they thinking with Orb Beetle? Orb Beetle is, of course, a beetle with psychic powers. And at a glance, it looks alright. It got pretty good stats. 60 HP is not the best, but its defenses are good, and its special attack is serviceable, 90 speed as well. It's pretty well-rounded. But Orb Beetle has the terrible Bug Psychic type combo. Ice Psychic might be worse, but Bug Psychic is not far off. A type with huge, debilitating weaknesses. Orb Beetle is of course a ZU Pokemon, and it's scarcely doing much of anything. It's also one of those Pokemon that's kind of weird in terms of its identity. It's like a special wall, kind of, but not really, because its typing completely fails for that, and it has no good healing, has no good utility, so... What is it exactly? It's sort of a boost sweeper with agility and stored power, and weakness policy. It could do that, but that's not great. It's tough to live hits with your typing being so bad. Is it an offensive or defensive Pokemon? It's kind of neither. It doesn't excel at anything. Orb Beetle. I'll give Orb Beetle some respect for being more distinct than, just another bug-flying type. That's no different from any of the other ones. At least Orb Beetle is trying to be a bit different here, but it wasn't different in a way that was very good. But perhaps there's worse than this. Perhaps Orb Beetle is not the bottom of the barrel. Stonjourner exists, and Stonjourner is quite terrible. At least Orb Beetle is unique, Stonjourner is not unique. Visually, it's pretty fun, Stonehenge-inspired creature, but this is the 1 millionth rock type with high attack, high defense, and low everything else. They've made so many Pokemon like this. The classic Rhydon type archetype, the old Sudowoodo, but Stonjourner is completely indistinct from all of them. And its special defense is a dreadful 20, making any slight breeze on the special side result in instant demise. It has a doubles-focused ability, granting bonus power to allies in doubles. It's kind of interesting, unfortunately useless in singles though, and Stonjourner feels not only weak, but hard to justify using over other superior Pokemon with the exact same archetype. But for me, I think the worst Pokemon in Gen 8, I would choose Greedent for this. It's actually not that cut and dry though. You could make a case for all these ones I've mentioned here. But I believe Greedent to be the worst of the worst. Greedent is yet another early route normal type. And Greedent's kind of a weird one. It has a very high HP stat, actually okay defenses, but a debilitating 20 speed. Greedent's whole thing is that it gets Belly Drum and Cheek Pouch. So it can use Belly Drum, bring its health low, activate the Citrus Berry, which heals it, and then activate Cheek Pouch as well. So if it eats a berry, it gets an additional heal. So you can use Belly Drum with kind of no drawback, other than consuming your berry initially. Unfortunately though, you have 20 speed, so you don't outrun anything. You don't live hits very well either. because of normal being an unexciting defensive typing. And for this to work, you really need Trick Room support, and Trick Room is just not very good in competitive singles. You gotta create the Trick Room, switch this in, belly drum, and that's already half the damn turns wasted. So how exactly are you expecting to sweep with this guy? It's just not going to happen. It's a concept that doesn't really work. A slow belly drum sweeper is just not something that works very well. Respect for trying something unique here, but I don't think it's as functional as anything else on the list. I mean, even Stonjourner at least has, like, defense. It can be a bad version of Rhydon or something. At least Orbital is orb-based. Spheres have their merit. I value spheres. Greedent is a squirrel. At least unlike the other Pokemon I've mentioned here for Gen 8, Greedent is not as consumed by the sins of greed. He's immune to greed, which is very good. But I actually would argue that gives you a disadvantage in combat. You need a bit of human greed to thrive in the dog-eat-dog world of Pokemon battles. Greedent is not cut out for that kind of thing, and unfortunately is the worst Gen 8 Pokemon. Finally, we reach Gen 9, where the overall power level of the franchise has definitely increased, but that doesn't mean there aren't some stinkers we can talk about. And the first and most iconic bad Pokemon in Gen 9 is probably Spidops. I'm sure you all thought of this one immediately. Spidops is the resident joke Pokemon of Gen 9, and it's a funny joke, little spider operative. Spinning a web, spinning a yarn, if you will. Spidops, sorry, is a mono bug with bad stats, 35 speed, and nothing to show for it. A mono bug is atrocious. You rarely see a mono bug, actually, because, I don't know, they usually go for bug poison and bug flying. Somehow mono bug feels more distinct than just another bug flying or bug poison, but competitively, it's really not doing you any favors to be a mono bug. It's terrible. So Spidops is just atrocious all around. It's worse than most middle stage evolutions, let alone fully evolved ones. But at least Spidops has 3 things of note that I can talk about here. 3 things. It has Sticky Web, of course. And if you have Sticky Web, you're worth more than Dirt. Dirt is not as valuable as Spider Web. It's a very powerful hazard that not many Pokemon get. So honestly, if you just put Spidops in the place of like an Araquanid Webs team, you put a sash on it and it just clicked webs, most of the time it's about the same as the Araquanid. Araquanid's obviously more optimal, it does more usually, but just being able to make webs is that valuable that having this move is a huge buff. Spidops also has that ability Stakeout, as we mentioned, so it can actually punch above its weight in terms of damage output. For that reason, and it has a way to take advantage of this because despite its low speed, it has First Impression, that stab bug move that is oh so great, making up for its 35 speed and dealing pretty good damage with Stakeout. Now, it's not like anyone uses this in ZU, but I think that these traits are at least worth some note. They're at least okay. But I'm not sure the same can be said of Wugtrio. You might think I'm crazy for saying such a thing. How could Wugtrio be worse than Spidops? How could that be possible? I think it literally is the case that Wugtrio is worse than Spidops. Wugtrio is a new convergent evolution for Dugtrio that is a water type with similar stats. 120 speed, an average attack stat of 100, but it's alright I suppose, and very frail in every other regard. But instead of having Arena Trap, the iconic Arena Trap ability of Dugtrio, it has the very strange option of Gooey. Gooey is an ability that, upon making contact, the enemy will have their speed lowered. This is a very weird choice for Wugtrio. It's completely useless, because you're already pretty fast, that's the one thing you have going for you. And you have no defensive stats. So how are you going to live a hit that makes contact and lower the speed and have that be relevant? It simply won't happen. It simply won't happen. It's a bizarre ability that is incredibly useless on this. The other option is Rattled, which grants you a speed increase if hit by a bug, dark or ghost type attack or intimidated. Once again, a speed-based ability that relies on taking a hit from something, which is just a terrible fit on a Pokemon that's already fast and that has no defenses. So your abilities are not helping. Your move pool is also very limited. You have Liquidation for Water Stab at least, and the new option of Triple Dive, which is a 3-hit attack, but you're really struggling to find anything else in this damn move pool. You got Stomping Tantrum, no Earthquake unfortunately, just Stomping Tantrum, which is a pretty weak coverage option, Throat Chop, and little else. Even in ZU, this is just a bad physical attacker that is getting outclassed by other things. It's posing almost no threat, it is insanely limited in options, and it's just a completely dysfunctional Pokemon. At least Spidops can have an impact by setting webs and maybe revenge KOing things with priority. I would be surprised if Wugtrio had any impact on a battle. But there's one more contender, and I'll be honest, I'm thus undecided about who's worse here. It could be Wugtrio or it could be this guy. The final contender is Squawkabilly. Squawkabilly is the new normal flying type of Gen 9. If normal flying was a bad typing back in Gen 5, it's just gotten worse. Unpheasant was boring and unexciting back then, and here's Squawkabilly, a normal flying type with incredibly average stats across the board, with its highest being 96 attack. Your stab damage is going to be very unimpressive on Squawkabilly. You do have some stab options in your moveset like Brave Bird and Dual Wing Beat, but you just aren't very threatening. Now Squawkabilly has some good abilities, like Intimidate, which is always decent, but kind of a bad fit on something so frail. You have Hustle, which might let you gamble and pose more of a threat than you ought to. At the risk of missing moves, you are doing more damage. And then there is Guts, which of course grants 1.5x attack if you are statist. I can't help but notice that Squawkabilly is a worse version of various other normal flying types that already exist. Staraptor has Intimidate, Swellow has Guts, Squawkabilly has these things, but it's worse than both of them. At least he's sort of funny, he's got Elvis hair in various colors, that's okay, but a pretty unexciting bird that is not very powerful. But who's worse between this and Wugtrio? Wugtrio's water typing I think is a bit better, it's faster, and possibly more threatening, but on the other hand, Squawkabilly does have Intimidate, and as bad as you are, Intimidate is going to help you a little bit. Squawkabilly also at least has U-turn, allowing it to pivot out, which was parting shot. And it, compared to Wugtrio, does have a bit more of a move pool. Now, its move pool is really bad, but next to Wugtrio, the move pool is looking vast, with Wugtrio's true drought of options. I think between these two, Wugtrio is actually the worst Pokemon in Gen 9 OU. At least Squawkabilly could have an impact with its pivoting and its Intimidate, maybe Hustle damage output. Wugtrio is just this awkward combination of weak and useless and limited and dreadful all around. So I would give the Gen 9 worst Pokemon title to Wugtrio. And that does it, folks, the worst Pokemon from every generation. That took a while, didn't it? Sorting through some garbage to find the worst of it. And we've done it, I think. Do you disagree with any of my takes here? Did I miss any bad Pokemon that were worthy of note? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you very much for watching.